Welcome to our journey of transformation. We're in the 8th lesson of our series, Loving God with All of Our Minds, and today's study is called Renewing Our Emotions. You notice I'm not in my office. I'm in another state, in front of the rice field where I'm working on another book, Lord willing. I'd like us to begin our study by reading from Philippians chapter 4, verse 4 and verse 8. Philippians 4, verse 4 and verse 8. There Paul writes, "Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice." And then in verse 8 he says, "Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things." We mentioned before that when the lost son returned home after losing all of his inheritance, the greatest challenge he would face would not be with his father, because his father was full of patience, compassion, and forgiveness, but with his brother. When his father invited his brother to participate in the celebration when the son returned, he reacted angrily and bitterly to his father and refused to go in and participate. In fact, I want us to read his words in Luke chapter 15, beginning with verse 28. Here's how he answered the father. It says, "The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, 'Look, all these years I have been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours who has squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him.'" That's amazing. His words really reveal a lot about his heart. He had not served the father out of love, but out of the desire to receive something. He resented all the work. He felt like he had been a slave and didn't appreciate in reality what the father had graciously given him. The father later tells him, "Everything I have is yours." The problem was, in his core, he was selfish. It's possible to think that the greatest challenge for the younger son would be to be patient and forgiving towards his brother. His brother, no doubt, would continue to be bitter and quick to show this bitterness to his brother, who would now be working alongside of him in the fields. But in fact, the greatest challenge for the younger son would be to deal with himself, with his own emotions about himself, and learn to be patient and forgiving about himself. The problem would be dealing with his own emotions about himself. Let's define what we mean by emotions. We know how to identify physical sensations like pain or pleasure. Identifying the cause and location of this pain, like a bee sting, is simple. And curing the pain can be very precise. But emotions are feelings that represent another kind of sensation produced by our brains that form part of our thinking. And they are not so easy to identify, describe, or cure. Are we afraid sometimes or just nervous about something? Why is it sometimes we can be impatient and then all of a sudden calm? Are we tired or are we really depressed? These are difficult questions sometimes to answer. And we have labels for emotional pain or pleasure, but these labels can represent a wide variety of imprecise descriptions for emotional pain. Like, for instance, anger. What do we exactly mean by anger? And what's the difference between being angry and being bothered by something? Sadness, shame, fear, excitement, awe, and even calm, joy, and compassion are emotions. Part of the problem, too, is that some of these words represent emotions as well as actions. You know that the word anger can refer to emotion as well as action. It's the same with compassion. The word compassion can be an action to care for somebody, or it can also be an emotion. Motivation is the principal role of emotions. Emotions motivate us to protect ourselves, to run, to hide, to fight, to help, or to care for things. Emotions can even motivate us to be inactive and paralyzed. Emotions like fear can motivate selfishness to protect and defend ourselves and seek our own pleasure instead of the pleasure of others. Emotions like joy and satisfaction, we can feel these emotions from revealing the suffering of others and care for their welfare, motivated by the action of love. And emotions immerse everything that we think and do. Even the four aspects of our thinking that we have been considering have lots of emotional connections: experience, perception, desire, and reaction. The experiences that form vivid memories are those experiences in which we have felt lots of emotions. And our perceptions of ourselves as not enough or superior to others form from those experiences that have lots of emotional connections, like satisfaction, pride, shame, or even joy and peace when we're born again and have a new perception of ourselves. Our desires to protect ourselves, defend ourselves, or withdraw are motivated by wanting to avoid certain emotions like fear and shame. And then when we're born again, and our new singular desire to live a transformed life is immersed in peace and joy. Lots of emotional connections. And our reactions to defend ourselves or protect ourselves can be motivated by bitterness, anger, or even depression. Our actions to love could be motivated by peace and joy. The challenge comes because even after being born again and having a new perception of ourselves, the old emotional connections remain. To renew our minds, we will have to deal with these old emotional connections. We all have experienced the frustration of trying to change a way of thinking while the old emotions keep returning back in unexpected moments, just like the lost son must have experienced. So why are emotions so difficult to change? A lot has to do with the way our brains are created. Emotions represent complex networks of connections to various regions of our brains, and the memories of experiences with more emotional connections are very vivid memories. And the emotions continue forming part of those memories. And in fact, emotions are the most memorable part of some experiences. You might remember what you felt during some past experience more than you remember what you said or did. And then if we have similar experiences repeatedly, those same emotional connections can become even stronger physically in our brains. Any similar experience can flood our brains with the same connections, emotional connections, because they form a pathway that begins to be well used. And two, emotions are designed to work in many situations impulsively, without much thought beforehand. This design is for our protection, so that we can react to dangerous circumstances without thinking a lot. So emotions represent very strong networks of connections, and these connections can light up even without conscious thought sometimes. Therefore, we cannot simply say to ourselves, I will not feel this emotion anymore. We cannot simply grit our teeth and refuse to feel it. Simply trying not to think about it will not work. The physical connections, the electrochemical connections between neurons that form the memory remain. They are not suddenly severed simply because we command them to be severed. On the other hand, this conscious effort that's required will be necessary to love unconditionally. Love does not come automatically. It's a struggle. But the struggle means that when we finally learn how to love, love will be part of our conscious being, part of us, and not just a chemical reaction in our brains. Conscious thought is one of the necessary requirements to love unconditionally. Now let's return to the case of the lost son and think about how the lost son might have experienced this problem of dealing with his own emotions once he returned home. He must have felt a wide variety of emotions during his experience. Enthusiasm, happiness, anticipation when he left for the far country, but also mixed with emotions like pride or bitterness, because those kinds of emotions would help defend himself against the guilt he would feel for leaving home and leaving the Father. Then when he had spent all of his money and had nothing to eat, he would feel sadness, disappointment, desperation. When he found that he was feeding pigs, he would be filled with shame and guilt. He would decide to return home and tell his father he no longer deserved to be a son, feelings of shame and not being worthy. But in the moment that he came to his senses, he made a great decision, whether he realized it or not in the moment. He made a great decision to feel what he was feeling, to acknowledge fully the pain. And then he could make a decision to seek relief for the pain, a conscious, powerful decision. Returning to the Father meant humbling himself, but humility meant relief. But imagine what he must have felt as he walked back home. He was filthy from feeding pigs. He was hungry, tired, anxious, with overwhelming shame and guilt, believing he was no longer worthy to be called a son. And then, when his father saw him, his father was moved by compassion, ran to him, kissed him, hugged him, brought him back home and restored him to being a son again. A great celebration followed, killing a fattened calf. His father declared to everyone there that was present that his son had been dead and was alive now, lost and now he was found. Incredible joy, peace, calm, gratitude, consolation suddenly replaced all the desperation and shame and fear. But if the son was like the rest of us, with the same kind of human brain that we have, those negative, painful emotions from the past did not completely vanish from his mind in the moment that he was accepted by the Father. They were physical connections that could light up and fill his thoughts in moments when he remembered something about the far country. The reality was that he had been completely restored in the mind of the Father. His father did not remind him of what he had done, didn't require him to pay back any of the money, and from now on would treat him as a son. But his brother wasn't going to be so easy. As we mentioned at the beginning, his brother's mind was governed by jealousy, bitterness, selfishness, and he would be happy to remind his younger brother again and again about his foolish and destructive behavior when he went away to the far country. But truthfully, the real problem was not so much his brother as himself. Those negative emotions were part of his own brain. Of course, they were invoked by his brother's treatment, but they were still part of his brain. His brother might change his disposition, but there would always be other people who would come along, relatives, neighbors who would remind him about what he did. And then he would experience all the feelings again, the shame, the guilt. How will he deal with these old, lingering emotions? How will he deal with them? He'll have to renew his emotions. The goal of renewing our emotions is not to deny our emotions or grit our teeth and tell ourselves we're not going to feel them anymore. The goal is renewing our minds by replacing those emotions, creating a new network of connections that becomes stronger than the old connections. Then by use of the lack of use over time, those old connections become weaker when we start training our minds to think about the new emotions, the positive emotions. But it takes time and conscious effort. But this is precisely what Paul was saying in Philippians chapter 4, verse 4, when he says, rejoice. And again I say, rejoice. Paul is teaching the principle of replacement. To rejoice means to celebrate. Celebration means to recall and think about all the reasons for our joy. Celebration is what the Father did when his Son returned. He did not deny the pain of his Son's destructive experience, but he did not allow his thoughts to remain there. He felt pain, of course he felt pain, but instead of feeling the pain, he decided to celebrate the joy of his Son's return. It was a decision that he made between feeling pain and feeling joy by celebrating. Do you think there was no pain? Of course there was pain. Our Father grieves when we leave the way to him. But the road to renewal can come with difficulty, but it can come. I want you to imagine the lost son coming back to the house after spending the day with his brother in the fields. He has felt bitterness. He has felt the bitterness of his brother in his comments and his gestures. When he comes back home from the fields, his mind can go in one of at least two different directions. Shame and guilt could fill his mind again. He could fall into a depression about not having anything. Or else he could become angry and bitter against his brother because of his brother's negative, critical attitude. So he's got to ask himself some questions. To renew his emotions, he starts by asking himself, what is it he's feeling? Recognize the emotions. When he returns back to the house, he feels frustrated, angry, even bitter with his brother. But his feelings are focused, either way, on his brother. But what is he feeling about himself? This is the question. And this is the most important question. The emotions toward his brother are defense against other emotions he feels about himself, the guilt, the fear, the shame. And his brother's continued negativity hurts because it brings back these old emotions he felt from losing everything and ruining his life and hurting others. All these feelings about himself will not allow him to love as his father loves. So now he's got to ask himself the question. And the next question, is there reason to feel these feelings now? But these feelings are the ones he felt before he returned to the Father. He had hurt his father, but his father had forgiven him completely and completely restored him as a son. He knew also in his heart that he did not want to continue a life of selfishness, but of love in the image of his Father. If it is true then that there's no reason to feel these emotions, then where are they coming from? That's the next question. Where do these emotions really come from if you don't want to feel them, if there's not a reason to feel them? The fact is, we're better prepared to answer this question now because we know how the brain works. The truth is, these old emotions are leftover connections in his brain that are still sensitive, nothing more. Just connections, electrical chemical connections. They are memories of emotions that he felt in the past. Memories that are maintained not by reality, but by electrical chemical connections between nerve cells in his brain. They are just connections. And something is bringing them back to life. The present experience with his brother, connected with a memory of these emotions of fear and shame. So now he asks himself another question. Who are you now? And who do you want to be? He knew from his experience with the Father that he was restored. So who did he want to be? He wanted to be a son, transformed in the image of his Father, to love unconditionally like his Father does. Then if that's the case, the next question, what emotions does he want to feel now? This is where replacement comes in. Think again of Philippians chapter 4, verse 4. Rejoice. And again I say rejoice. He needs to celebrate. That's what the Father was doing for him. He was celebrating. He needs to celebrate the change that has taken place inside of him, the change that's taken place in his life, the mercy, the grace of his Father. Celebrate it. And feel gratitude. Gratitude is an expression of celebration. It's giving thanks. And that's what he can do. To form new memories, to form new emotions, he can give thanks. He can celebrate. And he can feel peace. Feel at peace with himself now because of the peace he has with his Father. You know, we know mentally, intellectually that we can feel peace, but we need to allow ourselves to feel it. Feel what it feels like to be at peace. Know that we are becoming, step by step, who we want to be. Negative emotions take us in the opposite direction, away from what we want to be, and rob us of peace. So feel peace. Allow yourself to feel peace. And then what he must do, once he decides what emotions he wants to practice, He needs to practice these emotions over and over again to retrain his emotions. Celebrate, give thanks, feel the peace, feel the joy again and again. And each time that he's working out in the fields with his brother makes his comments and his gestures, and then he comes in at night, he needs to remind himself of these questions and ask himself these questions over and over again. Each time he does, he forms pathways in his brain that become stronger and much more active and alive than those old pathways that recall the old emotions. This is the way our brains are designed, to be able to build new connections that become stronger than the old ones. By repeating these questions to himself and answering them in the same way, he reinforces these new connections. It's okay that old emotions continue to return sometimes, but that's because that's the way our brains are designed. He doesn't have to feel guilty for that, but he has to feel free to feel new emotions. So what do we ask ourselves? We ask ourselves, what am I feeling? Not about the person who's offended me, but what am I feeling about myself? And is there a reason to feel this? If not, if we're transformed, if we're born again, if God has given us a new perception of ourselves, then where are these emotions coming from? They're just electrical chemical connections and left over. So who do I want to become now? Who do I want to be? Who am I? And what emotions do I want to feel because of who I am and who I'm becoming? And then I practice these emotions again and again. It takes time, lots of courage, lots of focus, but we retrain our minds in this way and we renew our emotions. Next time, we'll begin the series, Loving God with All of Our Strength. But until then, may God bless you.